there is a cold, specific type of quiet that lives inside an antique shop. You hold a pocket watch from 1890, or a leather-bound book with someone's initials faded into the cover, and your fingers register the texture of survival. The object is here. The person who cared about it, who polished it, who worried about losing it, is not. They are not just gone in the sense of being absent. They have been completely erased from the active memory of the earth. Most of our daily existence is a highly sophisticated, beautifully choreographed conspiracy to forget this exact fact. We wake up, check notifications, argue over politics, and obsess over a career trajectory as if the ground beneath our feet were permanent. But beneath every modern comfort, there is a low-frequency hum. It is the panic of an animal that has realized, with absolute certainty, that it is trapped in a biological countdown. We tend to look at fear as an emotional reaction to a dynamic threat. A car swerving into your lane, a shadow in a dark alleyway, a sudden medical diagnosis. But existential psychology suggests something far more unsettling. The human brain is a tragic evolutionary anomaly. We are the only creatures on this planet blessed with the high-level cognitive ability to contemplate the cosmos, to write poetry, and to build spaceships, while simultaneously cursed with the lowercase knowledge that we are made of meat and that meat rots. This is the central paradox of human existence. We have godlike imaginations, but we are housed in decaying fragile vessels that can be snuffed out by a microscopic virus or a loose piece of gravel on a highway. In 1973, a cultural anthropologist named Ernest Becker wrote a book that changed how we look at human motivation forever. He argued that the driving force behind human behavior is not the pursuit of pleasure nor the desire for power, but the absolute necessity to deny our own mortality. Becker called this the Immortality Project. Since we cannot survive physically, we attempt to survive symbolically. We build literal and metaphorical monuments that we hope will outlast our heartbeat. A corporation, a religious institution, a nation-state, a massive personal fortune, or even a highly curated digital persona. These are not just products of human ambition. They are sophisticated defense mechanisms designed to shield our eyes from the abyss. We pour our entire life force into these structures, desperately hoping that if our names are carved deeply enough into the fabric of society, the universe will somehow make an exception for us. But what happens when you test this theory in a cold, modern psychological laboratory? In the late 1980s, a group of social psychologists decided to turn Becker's philosophical insights into empirical data. They created terror management theory, and they designed a series of experiments that would look directly into the dark machinery of the human subconscious. The setup was deceptively simple. They brought hundreds of college students into a room under the guise of a standard personality test. Half of the students were given mundane questions about their daily routines or their plans for the weekend. The other half were given 2 specific prompts. Describe the emotions that the thought of your own death arouses in you, and write down what you think will happen to you physically as you die. This intervention is known in clinical research as mortality salience, making the reality of death raw and immediate in the subject's mind. After writing their answers, the students were given a completely unrelated task. They were asked to read essays written by foreign students that either praised or heavily criticized their country's political system, and then they had to rate how much they liked and trusted those authors. The results were chillingly consistent across hundreds of subsequent variations. The students who had been subtly reminded of their mortality did not become philosophical or reflective. Instead, they became aggressively defensive. They showed intense, disproportionate bias toward people who shared their cultural worldview, and deep visceral hostility toward anyone who challenged it. When the subconscious mind senses the smell of the grave, it does not look for truth. It looks for a fortress. The researchers discovered that when human beings are forced to confront their biological vulnerability, they instinctively tighten their grip on their tribal identities. They become more punitive toward moral transgressors, more nationalistic, more racist, and far more prone to dividing the world into us versus them. The experiment showed that our deep-seated social conflicts, our political polarization, our religious wars, our hatred of the outsider, are not simply disagreements over policy or theology. They are the collateral damage of our collective panic. We need our cultural worldviews to be absolute, infallible, and universally accepted, because if someone else's worldview is right, then our immortality project might be wrong. And if our immortality project fails, we are left completely naked in front of the monster. Think about the implications of this data when you look at the architecture of modern society. Consider the multi-billion-dollar anti-aging industry, the obsession with accumulating wealth far beyond what a single human could spend in 10 lifetimes, or the frantic desire to leave a legacy through children or career titles. We tell ourselves we are striving for excellence. We tell ourselves we are protecting our families or fulfilling our potential. But if you strip away the vocabulary of self-improvement, what you find underneath is an existential panic room. The modern world has commodified this avoidance strategy. We have created a culture of perpetual distraction. Every notification, every infinite scroll on a social media feed, every new purchase is a tiny brick placed in the wall that keeps the reality of our condition out of sight. There is a specific psychological metric called death thought accessibility. It measures how close the concept of non-existence is to your conscious awareness at any given second. In normal circumstances, your brain is highly efficient at suppressing it. If you see a hearse driving past, or if you read an obituary, your mind registers the event and then immediately shifts attention back to what you are going to eat for dinner. It is a necessary evolutionary survival trait. If we felt the full weight of our mortality every second of the day, we would be completely paralyzed by clinical dread. We would not hunt, we would not forage, we would not go to work. But the research shows that even when we think we have successfully pushed the thought away, it remains highly active in the lower basements of our neurology. It dictates who we vote for, how much money we spend, and how we judge the behavior of our neighbors. This realization forces us to re-examine the concept of human evil. We like to think that cruelty is the domain of monsters, of a rare pathological subset of the population who lack empathy or morality. But existential psychology reveals a far more uncomfortable truth. The greatest atrocities in human history were not committed by people who hated morality. They were committed by people who were trying to defend a sacred worldview that promised them symbolic immortality. When a group of people believes that their culture, their race, or their ideology is the ultimate source of meaning on Earth. Anyone who threatens that ideology is not just an opponent. They are an existential threat. They are a force of chaos that threatens to pull down the walls of the fortress and expose everyone to the dark reality of the void. In this state of mind, cruelty becomes a distorted form of self-defense. Let us look closer at your own day-to-day existence. Look at the moments where you feel a sudden, inexplicable surge of anger because someone criticized your lifestyle, or because a public figure challenged a belief you hold dear. Notice how your chest tightens, how your tone sharpens, how your mind instantly categorizes that person as an enemy. That is not a rational defense of a logical position. That is your terror management system firing on all cylinders. Your brain has linked that specific belief to your psychological survival. It feels as though if that belief dies, a part of you dies with it. We are all participating in a collective theater where we agree to pretend that our small temporary dramas matter infinitely, because the alternative is to admit that we are drifting on a tiny rock through an indifferent, silent infinity. In the middle of the 20th century, the existential philosopher Albert Camus wrote an essay analyzing an old Greek myth, the story of Sisyphus. Condemned by the gods for his arrogance, Sisyphus was sentenced to an eternity of useless, agonizing labor. He had to push a massive boulder up a steep mountain, only to watch it roll back down to the bottom the very moment it reached the peak. Then he had to walk back down, brace his shoulders against the stone, and start again. Camus argued that Sisyphus is the ultimate metaphor for the human condition. We build our careers, we accumulate our possessions, we construct our grand narratives, knowing with absolute certainty that death will eventually roll the stone back down to the valley. The universe does not care about our blueprints. It does not remember our triumphs. The easy escape from this realization is nihilism, the belief that because nothing lasts, nothing matters. It is a form of psychological surrender, a way to go numb so that the stone doesn't feel so heavy. But numbness is not a solution. It is just another form of hiding. The more difficult path, the one that requires a terrifying level of psychological courage, is to look directly at the boulder, to acknowledge the inevitability of the valley, and to push the stone anyway. Not because it will grant you eternal life, and not because it will carve your name into history, but because the act of pushing, the deliberate choice to create meaning in a space that has none, is the only true rebellion available to a conscious creature. When you leave that antique shop and step back into the bright, noisy confusion of the street, the world looks exactly the same as it did before. The cars are still rushing past, the billboards are still screaming for your attention, and people are still hurrying toward their appointments. But if you look closely, you can see the cracks in the pavement. You realize that every grand building, every digital screen, and every passing face is part of a delicate, temporary scaffolding built over a vast ocean of silence. The goal of understanding your own dark psychology is not to rid yourself of fear. It is to recognize the hidden strings that have been pulling you from the shadows. Once you understand that you are running, you finally have the option to stop. You can look back at the thing that has been chasing you since the day you were born, and you can decide how to spend the brief, beautiful, and terrifying moments you have left before the glass shatters.